All right, now we are going to finish our kind of final video on humanism here, and we're going to get into the philosophy of humanism, some of the deeper things that we've got, some practical things as well, and just kind of where humanism is going to take us during this particular time period. So the first thing we're going to talk about is Neoplatonism. Now, Platonic or Platonism, the ideas of Plato were a different level of philosophy. Not only did Plato talk about things like what type of government would be good and stuff like that, but then you have these things like the allegory of the cave and what is real and what is not real and all that type of stuff. And what we really start to see is kind of an expansion on this, and it is going to be important. And the guy that really does this is Marsilio Ficino, and he will translate a lot of Plato's work, and he'll look at it in a really deep level, and he comes out with his main work of Platonic theology. And there's two main ideas that come out of this, okay? One is the idea of the hierarchy of substances, and the whole idea here is that there's a great chain of beings, from plants all the way up to God, and humans are in the middle, and that we provide a link from the material world, which is our physical being, and the spiritual world, which is our soul. Okay, and the idea is that these are two separate things. Okay, there's kind of like the material world and the spiritual world. As a result, the idea is that the soul itself is immortal. Okay, and understanding the link between your soul and your physical body is important because humans in general, we have things like sorrow, psychological issues, and confusion over what is real, what isn't real, because the soul itself is immortal, but it needs to inhabit a corporal body, if you will, in order to function. Okay? And as a result, he starts to really look at things on a much deeper level. This is taking humanism to the next level because, remember, humanists want to know why stuff works and how stuff works. And Ficino is trying to explain to us what the stuff actually is, okay? So here's the idea. Plato had this idea of what is called a form. A form is an abstract property or quality, like roundness and color and weight, etc. Forms don't exist in space and time. Okay, so what do we know of this? A basketball has roundness and it exists, but roundness also exists outside of a basketball. Okay, so you have stuff like roundness and color and shape and things like that, regardless if you have those items that actually exhibit those shapes, okay? And what happens is that forms are what cause existence, okay? And what's important is that forms are pure because material items can change or even deceive us. Therefore, the material world isn't really a true representation of the universe, that there is more stuff out there than just what we see. And if I go back to my basketball thing, like a basketball is round, but then a basketball can become flat, and now the basketball is no longer round, so the basketball isn't necessarily always a true thing, yet the idea of flat and round are. Okay, and so what Ficino does is he takes these ideas, okay, and blends it to this concept of proving the soul, which for people that follow religion, this is a very important thing, okay? And what he really focuses on, interestingly enough, though, is the importance of, of love, okay? In that love unites all humanity and all humanity with God. Okay, that matter, like the physical stuff that you and I touch, is less real than souls and love because, again, its matter is shadowy and deceptive. but because of the goodness of God and the goodness of the soul, the world in general is good. And your soul is what drives what you do. And so he has this quote here: everything in nature is either a cause aimed at you or the consequence made by you. So you and your soul is kind of the center of it all. And it was a way of getting people to get more involved. It was a way of getting people to kind of take control of their own lives. And it was really, really important. Okay. And that's the impact that philosophers can have. And if anything, man, they just make you think. Then there was something called Hermeticism, which is going in a little bit of a different direction here. This is a focus on astrology and alchemy and stuff like that. This idea of that you can transform one thing into another thing, that's alchemy. The belief of the impact of the stars on how our life, functions. And a lot of people have a great stock of, in astronomy, or not astronomy, in astrology today. Okay, I would bet most of you know your astrological signs. And even though you may not believe that your astrological sign determines your life, the fact that you actually know it shows the importance that it has to some people. And if you're wondering, yes, the best is Aries. Anyway, and they would also study like magic and things like that. Now, the interesting thing, these alchemists were some of the world's first chemists, and we are going to learn things about chemistry and matter because of these alchemists that play with stuff. Most notably would be the Chinese alchemists that create gunpowder, although I'm not sure how good of a thing that is. Another thing about Hermeticism, again, looking at the different angles, is this idea of pantheism, which focuses on the spirit of God being in all things in nature. Okay, so yeah, let's stop cutting down trees. That's the whole idea, that God will exhibit himself to us through things in nature. The overall idea, when you look at astrology and alchemy, is this idea, I have here the immortality of the soul, that the overall idea that humans are divine beings, okay, and they're endowed with divine creative power, and we freely act within the world, or the material world. And again, this goes back to because we have a soul. A soul enables us to do that. A soul enables us to see God in nature. A soul enables us to experiment with alchemy and magic and things like that. And what's interesting, though, through the purification of the soul, there's a big focus, I guess you could say, on like meditation a little bit, and how meditation can allow you to understand your soul at a greater detail, and understanding that your soul is indeed divine, which allows you to gain more knowledge. And a lot of the stuff is a little abstract, but it gets people thinking differently. It gets people to investigate things, and we'll talk about some of the practical applications of it a little bit later. One guy that really is at the top of this group is Giovanni Pico della Mirandola. He writes a book called The Oration of the Dignity of Man. Okay, and the idea here, and the reason why the ideas of like Hermeticism and humanism are important, is that the idea is that you are responsible for your actions, that everything isn't just predestined by God, and that you have a role here. To him is granted to have whatever he chooses to be what he wills. Like if you want something to happen, like you go and do it. Okay, that you be involved in your life. And this was a new concept, okay, which will also be really big in the Reformation. Like these ideas are kind of haunting around the Reformation, if you will. This is a very new concept, okay? Prior to this point, people kind of really, the general belief is your life is the way it is because God has said it is that way, and that's just what you have to do, and that you have to accept it. The idea of advocating for your own change is something that had never really been done before. And so the Hermeticists, by explaining this idea of a divine soul are also going in a different direction of saying that because you have this soul, you can do whatever you want. You just have to really be more aggressive with it. And that, so those first two things are kind of more of this spiritual abstract stuff. But there was also an impact at history, okay? And yes, I might be a ninja at night. You'll never know. History is going to change a little bit because of the influence of humanism, is this idea of taking a secular view of it. Prior to that, histories tended to really be based on this idea of, kind of following around what the church said, or really trying to look as the Bible as the basis of history and not trying to be objective. And so the whole idea is that we want to focus on researching and verifying actual events. Now, we all know that, historians, everybody's going to write from a point of view. However, the idea is that historians are trying to take more and more of an active role of researching and verifying things as they happen. And a guy that was really crucial on this was Francesco Guicciardini. I'm pretty sure I said that wrong. Could be Guicciardini, but put it into Google Translate and see what you get. He wrote two main works, the history of Italy and the history of Florence. He was a Florentine. And a lot of people see this as the birth of modern history, because the whole idea, and when he looked at writing his history, is that he wanted to use history to teach lessons, but he realizes that history is also very complex. And so what he does is he actually analyzed events from different perspectives to gain a more complete version of what happened. And that's really, really important, that we can see both sides of a story. Okay, that you can see this person's view and that person's view, because so much of history up to this point, and often is told today, is like there's like the good guy, bad guy version of history, and that's not really how things work in the world. Okay, it's not always as black and white as that. And something else that Francesco here tried to do was to focus on using primary sources and traveling to the places that he was writing about, so he could truly understand and actually see what was there and what maybe some of the impacts of these things were. And so history is now taking a change and being more interactive. And then as a result, we start to get a focus on education. Okay, yes, smart equals success. Okay, so what can education do for a person? Well, it can change you for the better. It can give you greater opportunities. It can give you a deeper understanding. And I'm not necessarily talking about sitting down and going to a school or having to go to college or all of those types of things. It's this idea of bringing knowledge into your own being, which allows you to do it. And on a side note, yes, the internet is fun for a variety of different things, but understand, if you have access to the internet, which you probably do if you're watching my video, you have more access to knowledge than anyone who has ever lived in the entire history of the world, perhaps combined. So yes, we can do Twitter and Snapchat and all that type of stuff, and it's fun, and we research pictures and watch video on YouTube, but read, learn, absorb this idea that knowledge can change you, and it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing, it's just a thing. Okay, but the Italians did realize that, and one of the things that they learned about by studying Greek history is that the Greeks had a lot of schools, and so what do they start to do? They start to open up schools. Okay, one of the more famous one is Gian Francisco I Gonzaga, okay, who was the leader of Mantua, and he started a school real simple because he wanted his kids to get educated. As so many often we do, is we try to give our kids great educational opportunities. Both my kids went to camps for computers this summer, So the whole idea was to get people this exposure. You also have the University of Mantua, which is founded by a man by the name of Vittorini di Feltre. Again, Vittorini di Feltre. And it's crucial because what's going to happen is that the nobility and the upper class are going to put a premium on education. Now, don't get me wrong. For the most part, most of the education is going to be for the elite, but we do have to start somewhere. And so what was the curriculum? It mainly focused on the liberal arts or humanities. I talked about humanities already, but you need to know things like history, but overall like stuff how to develop and defend an argument, which we are going to do a lot in this class, as well as obtaining a base of knowledge with which you can work. And we're also going to include things like mathematics, ethics, which is a big one which we need more of, astronomy, physical education, sound mind, sound body. So we do things like wrestling and running and archery and hunting and swimming, the javelin because it's awesome, and archery. So the whole idea is that we have this well-rounded education, okay? And especially physical education, we often scoff on that. If we have physical education, if we have a healthy body, again, healthy body equals healthy mind, things are good. And what is the point? It's to create educated and involved citizens. Again, we go back in time to the last video on this idea of civic humanism, okay? So here's a quote from Vittorini da Feltre, who founded the University of Mantua. Okay, not everyone is obliged to excel in philosophy, medicine, or the law, nor are all equally favored by nature, but all are destined to live in a society and to practice virtue. So there are some people that have better education, there are some people that are better with education, but we all have to live in society, and if we live in society, we need to be educated. And so much so, if you look on the right, in Venice, Italy, this is like one of the most beautiful libraries. I would spend like half my life in this place if I had access to it. This is the Marciano Library in Venice, Italy. On the top up here is the outside, then there's the inside. But get educated. It can help. Okay. Now, are there some issues? Yes, some areas provided free education, but normally you had to pay for it. Therefore, the commoners, not a lot of access. And women really didn't have any opportunities, and often if they did get education, they focus on things like poetry, music, and writing, which is okay, but they were discouraged from things like the rhetoric and mathematics and stuff like that. And we're going to be talking about that. Some women would try to buck the trend, but we see these changes in philosophy and history and education, and it's really going to continue to drive the success of the Renaissance. All right, so let's make sure we get our assignment done, and I'll see you guys soon.